Just as we thought that the Chinese economy couldn't get any worse, Evergrande files for bankruptcy protection in the US. But wait, there's an industry worth $3 trillion US and it's about to blow up too, because it's all a big Ponzi scheme. Welcome to China Insider, I'm David Zhang. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Oh my god, this David guy keeps saying that China is going to go kaboom. So many bombs in its economy. There's no way that it's going to go kaboom. Bloomberg, troubled 137 billion shadow bank plans debt restructuring. Bloomberg, housing slump is much worse than official data shows. Nikkei Asia, China developer, profit falls 93% in fresh blow to property market. Bloomberg, Morgan Stanley sees missing its growth target this year in China. Bloomberg, Chinese officials meet with foreign firms. Well, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be that guy, but the worst is yet to come. Basically, a few days after I said that China's slumping real estate sector, which accounts for 30% of its economy, is facing two ticking time bombs, one of the bombs, Evergrande, may have just started to explode. Although I have some suspicion about this whole event, but we'll just stick to what we know so far. Now, Evergrande posted an $80 billion US dollar loss over the past 2 years, and it has over $300 billion in total liabilities. On August 18th, which is Thursday, it filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy in the United States. Now, that's a law that allows foreign bankruptcy to, if it affects U.S. financial interests, to be protected from American creditors. While this only affects the portion of its finances that's in the United States, as Evergrande did go public in the U.S., its Hong Kong and Cayman Island finances are still holding. So it's not a complete bankruptcy. In other words, if I understand this correctly, whatever portion of Evergrande's finances and investments that had American footprints in it, so people investing in the US, will be protected from lawsuits against those that try to get their money back. But the company itself is not fully bankrupt. See, it sounds very suspicious here, but again, I'll stick to the facts. Now, honestly, this whole thing, when it was happening back in 2021, I already said it was a Ponzi scheme, right? When it went public with an IPO in the US. I just really don't trust Chinese companies to make it up to the investors in the end. I'll tell you this, China's overseas, especially in the US stock market, the companies, I think they're playing a big shell game. It's a scam game. Look, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a Bloomberg financial analyst and I know everything about the economy. I just know some simple stuff. But what I do know is that 100% of the time that the Chinese regime and the Chinese companies, they can't be trusted. Now, Chinese companies have known to fake their numbers to go public all the time. One Evergrande unit says it's now being investigated in China because all these financial industries in China, they're one big Ponzi scheme, really, to get money for the CCP. So other than them faking numbers to get the IPO to go public, well, if you think about, remember the case with Luckin Coffee? That turned out to also be a Ponzi scheme. Of course, it also filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy, but no one is now investing in Luckin Coffee. But the other side is, you also don't have to believe me because, I'm just trying to save you money, right? Don't invest in Chinese companies just in case. You never know what's going to happen next, especially with Evergrande. It's so big, bigger than anything we've experienced right now. Now, I mean, the Chinese real estate in China is already a big bubble. I mean, it's basically developers making rounds on massive projects that fail to make profits. So the whole thing just traps money instead. And the more projects that they do, of course, the local governments make more money, and there's that relationship, and there's corruption. But in the end, all I'm saying is that the Chinese economy, it's all fake numbers with manufactured projections, and when they do so in the United States, I just hope that the laws will sustain justice for the people. Now, of course, China has tried, right? The central bank's policies, they've tried to do something to move people to spend more money. But people are just tired of the regime. So the real estate downfall is very much real. Remember Country Garden? The country's largest and perhaps the healthiest real estate developer. Now it's also nearing its first default. So there's one Evergrande kaboom, and then there's the Country Garden kaboom. And this is very important because later on we'll be talking about why the real estate sector matters so much in China. Look, I'm really impressed that Evergrande is still breathing today. At least since 2021, it's been seeking breathing space. It keeps saying that it's restructuring, and it's announced many restructurings. But since it has defaulted on the dollar-denominated debts in 2021, the business environment in China has only deteriorated further. So it's not a good, healthy environment for it to try to build itself back up. Now, I'm just going to make a claim out there. I think that Evergrande is dead. They're just trying to resuscitate a zombie, basically. And it's one bullet to the head away from just, stop being a Walking Dead. Restructuring is basically trying to revive something, right? It's usually what happens when you, with debt restructuring especially, it's when a company fails to make its payments or, significantly is unable to operate for profit. But then Evergrande has become, since 2021, the poster child of a bigger problem, which is the Chinese real estate. It's just so bad. Now, before we move on, I want to introduce my sponsor for this video. Blueberry Quality Products. Blueberry carries some of the best skincare products out there, including this Derma Roller face mask. It has intensive hydration from the hyaluronic acid, and I use it once a week. It helps me keep me from getting overproduction of oil, which leads me to have acne breakouts. And of course, I use makeup when I film on camera that when I take it off, my skin gets quite dry. This does both to help me protect and repair my skin. So head on over using my link in the description and you can receive 15% off all products and free shipping in the United States if you spend $70 or more. All right, back to the video. Now take a look at this graph here. That's a high yield return on China's real estate, which if you take a look at the time, it dropped 82% since May of 2021. Right around the time that Evergrande started to show its real problems. Of course, this is all a long-term buildup. It's not just suddenly things went wrong. And during the 2021 period, it was still in zero COVID lockdown, but it was already showing signs that people were afraid to spend more money. Now, this graph tells us two things. There's no more money to be made in China from real estate, and that no one is buying properties. And that has basically the story that's continuing until this day, and now we're seeing more and more come to the surface. Now, despite orders from the CCP to not lower prices in China, the Chinese real estate price overall has still decreased significantly. Now, this all sounds pretty bad, but there's even something worse. An industry worth $3 trillion is blowing up. So add another bomb to those two. Now, remember, in China, of course, China's real estate sector accounts for 30% of the economy. Some say 25%. 30% it seems to be the official agreement. Other industries in China, they're often tied heavily to the real estate sector just because of the sheer percentage of the economy is real estate. Now, this is China's trust industry. For simplicity's sake, just think of it as China's version of Blackrock or Vanguard. They offer much higher interest rates than regular banks, but it caters only to the large companies and the wealthy investors. So they're heavily invested in real estate. Now, if you consider that the whole real estate sector in China is a Ponzi scheme, the trust industry, that's like the multiverse of Ponzi schemes. This trust industry is known as China's shadow banking sector. Particularly a group called Zhongrong Enterprise is the biggest of it all, and it's worth $138 billion. Now, Zhongrong is a part of that big enterprise. Now it's missing dozens of payments to investments. Two main reasons why it's happening. The first is that it is a much less amounts of money being invested or managed by that particular industry than before, simply because there's not as much economy or much movement in the economy, and so that seems to make sense, especially in the real estate sector. The second reason is that it's basically putting 5 pots of boiling water, but only 3 lids on it, right? You're just kind of putting lid onto each pot, thinking that that can cover it all. So simply you don't have enough to cover all of the investment products. So what they're doing is moving funds from one place to another to cover the existing holes by digging out holes from the ground, but you eventually still end up with the same amount of holes. I don't know if that makes sense. In reality, they just don't have enough money to actually run the system. Of course, banks also do this to you, right? They take your savings and they use it for investment, and then whatever they make, they give it back to you as interest. But it doesn't mean that your money, when you see that number in the bank account, it's actually still there. Well, of course, you can go withdraw it, but it doesn't mean the money is still just in your portion. It's being flown in to other parts of the system. Now, in China's case, they moved so much money around because, one, a huge portion of that is pocketed or it's embezzled because of corruption and systemic failure. Remember, nothing in China goes on without the Communist Party being involved, right? And then you also have a lack of regulation. So the real amount of funds being circulated in the system is pretty much unknown. They claim to have a certain amount, but who knows? So to spare you the grueling economic stuff, which also makes my head hurt, I'll just tell you this. Imagine a bunch of suits sitting at a table. Think American Psycho Patrick Bateman, passing out business cards. But instead of business cards, they're checks of crazy amounts of money, just tossed around in the room, right? Circulating, but nobody is there to regulate them. Just the richest Chinese people parking their money for high amounts of returns on investment. And a huge amount of that money got thrown into real estate. Some even went to real investments that yielded some returns over the years, but many other portions, the funds got stolen and they were given to CCP officials. Here's why the trust industry is affected by real estate. Many trust products are backed by properties, these projects that are struggling to make any money, such as Evergrande or Country Garden. Now, these firms then brought these property projects furthermore to try to bet on the fact that these ones who are still building will finish in time and then people will buy it. Of course, back in a few years ago, that was the case, right? Everybody wanted to buy a home. But then once COVID hit, everything stopped. And so you were basically investing into a dead-end project. And so that amount is never coming back. And it just hasn't happened over the years since. Now, those property developers themselves, too, their money is also stuck in those unfinished projects, right? Evergrande had about 700 by the time it declared default, and Country Garden had about 3,000 by the time it declared its first default. Now, according to one financial manager at one of the trust funds, he worked there for 7 years, he says that this incident so far involves about 150,000 high net worth investors, nearly about 5,000 corporate clients, and about 31 billion US dollars or 230 billion RMB in credits. So the total asset management of this Zhongrong trust, which is part of that big enterprise, at the end of last year was about 786 billion yuan or 100 billion US dollars. And it's considered only the 5th largest trust company in China. By different numbers, real estate accounted for about 11% of the company's 629 billion yuan of trust assets that's currently under management. But remember the 11%. So if we extrapolate that to the $3 trillion industry, 11% of $3 trillion, that's like 330 billion US dollars in real estate invested, right? Again, that's the entire industry. But we know that the number is probably much higher because real estate back in the days was seen as profitable. And that's bigger than some countries' GDP. And that industry is failing. Isn't that scary? Now, people actually call the trust industry in China the Lehman Brothers. I won't sit here and tell you that I think that's how it goes because I just simply don't know enough. But the trust industry has been failing since at least 2017. So like I said, it's a long-term problem, but it's a buildup. We're now seeing it come to surface. So it's true that China never went through a Lehman Brothers moment in 2008. While the rest of the world did, right? What triggered the financial crisis or the beginning signal of it, China was shielded from it. But it doesn't mean that it won't arrive now. To be honest, what we're seeing now with the property sector, the trust industry, and everything that goes on in the Chinese economy, it's all their own doing. The reform and opening up era brought in so much money to the CCP, it made them so rich overnight. All that money sounded like it benefited the Chinese people. Well, sure, half of the country no longer lived in poverty, but how much more money was being made by CCP officials compared to regular people? The tremendous ratio. All of China's financial industries, they were once controlled by a faction called Jiang Zemin faction and the Zheng Qinghong faction. And that started in the early 90s all the way to the 2000s. And it still continues to this day. These companies, they swelled in tremendous size under Jiang Zemin's control. His faction profited off so much of the wealth that came to China. And of course, this is all at the expense of setting up massive Ponzi schemes to just bring so much people in, to lure investors, to bring all of these companies in. And in the end, it's just a money grab scenario. And this is what's happening now. We're seeing the end flow of the money going to the CCP. And then all of the industries above it, or below it in this case, they can no longer make any money because they simply didn't have enough to begin with. All of that massive amounts of investments, in reality, well, the money's gone. And what we're seeing now is finally stuff coming to the surface. And we're seeing the fraudulent industry behaviors, right? This isn't nothing to do with how well you can run the economic strategies for China, whether that's debt restructuring or not. In the end, it's the CCP's problem that they've created themselves to begin with. All right, that's it today on the episode of China's Evergrande going bankrupt or filing for bankruptcy, Chapter 15 in the US, with the relations to the Chinese economy. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, as well as always, comment below what your thoughts are on this topic in particular, and share with your friends if you think they'll enjoy it. All right, I'm David Zhang, this is China Insider. See you next time.